their app would have millions and millions of users in just a week. And then they would see repeated usage as well. And so it seemed like a really good place to try to invest your time. And we launched a few games. On Facebook to test this out. Some of these were games that were targeted towards a local audience rather than a foreign one. So we tried making a game on the Sun. We called it the Sun Festival. We tried making a cricket game using political characters from different parties that you could play matches against. We also tried doing things that were more in the category of serious games, so games you could learn from. So Trivia Twist was a trivia game that was made of news stories that would be live. You would get questions generated from them, and then you could play these games to learn about what current events and other events happening around the world. Around this time, we started talking with publishers in Japan, Australia, about porting some of these games over to their platforms. Now, this was all great, except only some of these things were obviously generating revenue for us. Others were still experiments with product ideas that we were hoping to make money from. And talking with publishers back then was very difficult, game publishers in particular. What they wanted was a very large percent of the revenue from your game. They wanted it available on very good licensing terms in advance. So you would put in all this effort to build a game, spend time, money, energy doing it. And what you would get in return is a promise that if the game makes a lot of money, we'll give you a small percent. We also explored locally the telco sector to see if we could distribute games in Pakistan. However, the problem back then was that Flashlight, even though it seemed like it would be a great platform to distribute your content around, wasn't coming pre-installed on mobile devices that were sold here. And so lots of telcos were very reluctant. They didn't want to invest in games that were being made on Flashlight. They just wanted a J2ME catalog, and they wanted to distribute it to their users at a very low price. They wanted to distribute games around 10 rupees, 25 rupees per game, which wouldn't have made much sense back then because downloading the games on GPRS was going to be difficult, and a very small percent of the total mobile users would end up using or buying these games. So we were still facing this problem. How do we generate revenue? We have developed a niche. We figured out a space. We think there's a lot of demand. How do we make money? Now, around this time, we're keeping our eyes open. The iPhone comes out. The iPhone platform, the SDK, is released. And so we decided, it's a different platform, different technology, but it addresses the same problem, which is how to try to distribute your content without having to worry about hundreds of handsets out there. Because what the iPhone promised was this one experience on one device that was being used by millions of people. So it was the one platform that Apple controlled entirely. The marketing for it, the distribution for it, the sales, the customer service, the design. If they promised that there would be simplicity, you could trust them because that's what they had done on other platforms. So you could invest in a game that might take 3 months to 6 months to make, which at the end of that period, you know that you could sell your content, right? And so that paid off. I mean, we started exploring it with small games, small apps. Our very first game, which is Fishing Frenzy, we made with another company, Mindstorm Studios in Lahore. Both of us worked towards it. And that game went to the top 10 free games globally, and had 2 million downloads in the first couple of months. So that gave us a lot of confidence that this is an industry this is a space that we can actually make a big impact in. Okay. So obviously, if you have a success, it's much easier to talk to partners and bring them on board. So once we had released some games on the iPhone platform that were doing well, we were able to reach out to other publishers and developers across the world to work with them on their games, port them over, as well as build new games for them. And then that's how we actually have been growing over the last couple of years, is by focusing in that market. All right. So that's briefly a story of how the company has picked its battles, picked its platforms, areas of focus. What is the company? What is the structure? Who are the people in it? We have this notion of different teams. Each team works on a specific product or an app. And it's made up of a group of people from different divisions in the company. One is production, which has producers and associate producers as well as game designers. Now, this is a category that doesn't really exist in Pakistan as such. You can't hire a producer straight out of college. There's no place where someone is being trained on how to become a producer for a game. A lot of this requires analytical skill, logical skills. So any graduate of a liberal arts school education could become a producer. But it also requires a lot of technical knowledge about games in particular. And games are fairly difficult. If you think in terms of the technology involved, you need to know artificial intelligence reasonably well. You need to know computer graphics reasonably well. You need to know about computer networking. You need to know about computer physics. Lots of things that require mathematical as well as computational skill. But at the same time, you need to know how to create stuff that's fun, that everyone will enjoy. And that's a lot of creative and original knowledge. And producers are the ones who drive these projects, so they need to have both. And for us, that was a major challenge on how to create that group, how to assemble people together and train them in-house. And secondly, we have engineering as a division. For us, each sort of engineer who's worked at Intash till at least middle of last year was a fresh graduate. They entered straight out of college without much experience. It was fine because the iPhone platform, which we were focusing on, was a very new platform anyway, so it wouldn't have made sense for us to look for very experienced people in that space. However, that does create some HR issues. If you have everyone who is fresh, then who do you make a manager in your team? Who do you make a team lead? How do you structure, organize your company around that? We tried to be as performance-driven for that as possible, and try to measure people's performance in a short periods of time, so 3 months to 6 months, and then promote them. And I think that paid off quite well for us in terms of our engineering structure. And lastly, art and sound. Game art is very hard to make. Similar to engineering, art on games defines whether or not your game will be successful. In many ways, the first thing anyone notices for a game is the cover art. What is the game icon like? What is the first splash screen like? And that has to be very appealing right away. And without a video game industry in Pakistan, it was very hard to try to build this in-house as well. As an entrepreneur, whenever you face these problems, I think it's critical to try to analyze the problem from a solution perspective, in the sense that if you can't achieve what you're after right away, how do you achieve it in some other possible way? For us, it was basically finding experts who were, if not in Pakistan, in our network in some way. So for games, obviously there are people who know how to make games in the world. Now there's some talent in Pakistan too, but back in the day when we were starting, there was less of that. We reached out in our network to talk to those people. So we had designers in the US who would mentor the team. We had artists who would help critique the work of our artists. And we also tried to bring our own sense into it, try to basically develop the skill set required in-house to actually do this too. I think what it takes mostly is having a team that's willing to accept that it needs to grow, not just financially, but also technically and in skill. And I think that's what paid off for us in that space. Okay, here I can skip this slide. This basically talks about the process we follow when we make a game. The basic idea is that we try to follow the same model as a software development project that's working on an agile methodology. Now, games require artwork done too, right? And production work done as well. So we try to adapt the process of making art to the same model that we use to build engineering features. What that means is we have user stories that define what needs to be done at a feature level. And then we have the same user story being worked on by either the artist or the engineer for that feature. So it'll first go to the artist who might make a wireframe for the feature, then go back to an engineer who starts working on the basic layouts and the basic UI controls. We go back to the artist to actually send the real assets, the graphic assets that need to be integrated. And then the engineer basically, once he's done, sends it back to the artist to verify that if this is correct or not, everything looks right, the experience is correct or not, right? And so the collaboration works well, and at the same time we can follow the same basic process in the team. We don't have two different pipelines, a different one for art and a different one for engineering, where you only talk to each other at the very end. That's typical for a lot of game companies where art has its own structure and pipeline and engineering has its own. Okay. Over the years, we've been able to work with lots of well-known brands and companies. And this is a selection for some of the ones we worked with recently. With each of them, we learned something new. So what we've tried to do when we picked our projects with third parties is try to assess whether there is a learning opportunity for us in this or not. As a business, you can basically pick your client just based on need. We need X amount of money made, and so we go ahead and do any work that we can. We've consciously decided not to do that in many cases. We have picked projects that don't make a lot of profit, simply so that we can learn from the people we are working with. So your partners or your clients can be a source for your HR training if you let them know in advance that your people's level is at the beginner intermediate level. In that case, they can be part of your team in many ways. And so what you end up doing is supplementing and complementing them, rather than just taking on some work as an external vendor where they treat you as a vendor. And so this is something that allows you, I think, if you go out looking for business yourself, if you phrase it in this way, I think this will allow your own teams to grow and mature. Same time, we've been able to launch some of our own games, and they've had some good success on the App Store. Success we've measured in terms of app ratings. Do people like these? Do they not like them? The number of downloads they received. If we have an app that reaches somewhere in the million users that downloaded it, then we feel it's a success. And also reach. So what markets have they been able to effectively reach? Bam Bam Dash is an example of that. So Bam Bam Dash was very successful in Europe, and it was very successful in China. Two markets we hadn't explored that much before with other games.